What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. And this one is some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 7 deadline, which is looking a little bit quieter than it was in Game Week 6. And as always, I'm going to go through the latest press conference information, news on injuries, answer some of your questions, and quickly run through my team as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Let's jump into it. So let's start with the latest Spurs updates. As we know, Son missed the game against Man United in Game Week 6. Not that it made any difference to the result whatsoever. And apparently he's still a doubt going into Game Week 7. So he's pushing hard to be fit for the game against Brighton on Sunday. But Ange Postecoglou said he's unlikely to play. So it's a really tricky position to be in if you're a Son owner, because the fixtures are good from now, especially for an attacker. And from Game Week 8, you've got that fixture swing as well. West Ham at home, Palace away and Villa at home. So if you've got him, you kind of want to keep hold of him for that. But it's a lot of money to be benching. A lot of the time, if this was like a £6-7 million midfielder, and you had, say, a Rodgers on the bench, I would say don't worry about it. Just play Rodgers instead. But when Son's costing almost as much as a Saka or a Palmer, it feels like a lot of money to be benching. And I guess there's no guarantee he would be back for Game Week 8, but I'd say it's going to be quite likely given that you've got an international break between 7 and 8. So I think he will be back by then, although Ange Postecoglou didn't necessarily say that specifically. I think if I didn't own Saka or Palmer and I had the money to switch from Son with free transfers, I would probably just do it. It just feels like too much money to be benching. Yes, he's a good option from Game Week 8, but he's not the be-all and end-all. So if you've got an easy route to like a Saka, Palmer, maybe even a Salah as well, I would probably take it. If you've got a genuine benching dilemma this week and you just want to keep hold of him, or it would take hits to get Saka or Palmer, but I still wouldn't be necessarily against a hit for either of those two players. But if you didn't want to do it, which is fair enough, and obviously you can bench him. But if you've got an easy way to do it, I'd probably look at it. He also said that Destiny Udogie, we think he will be okay. I think he went on to say that as long as he gets through the training session today, then he should be able to play. So if you've got Udogie, which I suspect most people don't, he's probably going to play against Brighton. Obviously, then he's a good option from Game Week 8 onwards as well. Let's talk about Brighton next, who are, of course, playing Spurs this weekend. Van Heck is going to miss that game, so that does weaken the Brighton defence. Good news if you've got any Spurs attackers. The Athletic tweeted that Van Heck is expected to return from a groin injury after the October international break. They tweeted that on October 2nd, so he could possibly be back by Game Week 8, but Gjertsås said they're taking it week by week. So there's not a timeline on that injury from the manager. There's probably not a huge amount of Van Heck owners out there, but I just wanted to mention that. He also said that Van Heck's injury is not as bad as João Pedro's. So Van Heck out until after the international break. They're taking it week by week. And that injury isn't as bad as João Pedro. So João Pedro looking like he could be out a little bit longer than that. How long, I just do not know. But he's definitely going to miss Game Week 7. And it sounds quite unlikely that he'll be back for Game Week 8. Now, at this point, most people probably aren't looking to play João Pedro anyway. They've either got rid of him or he's just going to be on the bench. But there is a chance, I guess, that he would also miss Game Week 9, which is Wolves at home. Probably the best fixture that Brighton have got in the next 5. And after that, it's Liverpool away in 10 and Man City at home in 11. So if you've got João Pedro, I wouldn't be expecting him to play a part in 7, probably 8, maybe even 9 as well, although we don't have a timeline from Gjertsås. And that would, of course, make players like Welbeck better, who's probably going to be on penalties with João Pedro out. So if you're looking for a cheap player around 5.8, I don't mind him as a short-term pick. I just think the fact you've got to go away to Newcastle in 8 and then Liverpool away in 10 and City in 11 means it's not a long-term move, no matter how long João Pedro is out for. So if you're looking for someone for the next 2-3 weeks, maybe Danny Welbeck is a nice cheap option to look at. If it needs to be longer term than that, I'd probably still look at like Calvert-Lewin or Chris Wood instead. So we actually got definitive news about Isak from Eddie Howe this week. He said Alex Isak will not make the game. We hope he will be back with Callum Wilson for the game after the international break. So Isak is going to miss Game Week 7, and then potentially he and Callum Wilson might be available for Brighton at home in Game Week 8. At this point, if you're an Isak owner, it's probably worth just cutting your losses. Like, even if he is back for Game Week 8, Brighton at home is fine, but then it's Chelsea away in 9 and Arsenal at home in 10. And there's no guarantee that he would definitely be back for Game Week 8. Just a reminder from what Eddie Howe said the previous week, it's a broken toe, but it's manageable. It's all about how much pain Isak is kind of going through and whether he can get through a match. And obviously at this point, that is just not happening. So like I said, there's no guarantee that he'd even be available for 8. So I would probably just get rid of him. If you're looking for a forward in and around his price, I don't mind buying Ollie Watkins if you've got money in the bank. Otherwise, I'd probably go to Solanke. I think Havertz is definitely better this week than Solanke if you're not already tripled up on Arsenal. But as a longer term move, and the fact that Solanke is cheaper, that's where I would go from Isak if I had him. Eddie Howe also said, Nick Pope, Kieran Trippier and Fabian Schär should be okay. Dubravka took a nasty whack to the knee, but it won't be serious. Probably not massively concerning any of those players from an FPL point of view. It's worth noting, very, very minor thing. I know people gave me a lot of stick for this when I put it in a YouTube short, but Fabian Schär took a penalty midweek. So if Isak and Wilson are out, which they are, and Gordon ever goes off the pitch, Fabian Schär could be 4th in line. And with the amount of injuries that Isak and Callum Wilson get, there is a chance maybe at some point he'll take penalties. Really quickly on the Isak thing, Gordon will almost certainly play number 9 and be on penalties, as we know. And with the injuries that Everton have got, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, he does look like a really nice pick for game week 7 and 8. So if you need a short-term midfielder, I really like Anthony Gordon for 7 and 8. But again, he's probably not a longer-term option because of the fixtures that Newcastle have in 9 and 10. So there's a bit of Everton news that we should talk about around Mykolenko and Branthwaite. Now, it is worth saying that Sean Dyche held his press conference on Thursday and didn't mention either of these two players. So neither he nor the club have confirmed this information, but I think it's good enough that we should probably talk about it. So on Branthwaite, there's a Twitter account called The Bobble, which I followed for a while, which has Everton information. And it says, Everton defender Jarrad Branthwaite has suffered a minor quad injury in training. Now, minor obviously means he's probably not going to be out for a while. He may not even miss the Newcastle game, I guess, but there has to be a chance. We don't have a timeline right now, but I would say it's probably likely that he misses game week 7, which is going to weaken the Everton defence overall. Now, there's probably not a huge amount of Branthwaite owners out there, but there probably are a few Mykolenko owners. And again, there's a Twitter account which I followed the Bobble one, but I've not heard of this one before. But essentially, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. It's Zorya and then London SK. And according to Twitter, it's the #1 source for Ukrainian football in English. They've got about 16,000 followers. And essentially, the tweet says, going from bad to worse for Zaberna, I probably pronounced that wrong, in their latest video, Tattoo Take, are reporting that, I've probably got that wrong as well, are reporting that Vitaly Mykolenko will miss the next 2 to 3 weeks because of a calf injury. Everton are yet to report or confirm the news, praying it's not as serious for the national team's sake. And then just below that, they've linked the video, which is not in English, so I'm not even going to bother listening to it. And it's from a YouTube channel that's got nearly 100,000 subscribers. So again, none of this has been confirmed, but it sounded legit enough that I thought I better discuss it in this video. So if you've got Mykolenko, there's a chance that he's not going to play this weekend. It's probably not worth rushing out and selling him or anything like that. It sounds like it's just a minor injury, and hopefully you've got someone else on the bench you can play instead. But it's worth noting because there will be squads out there that have maybe got Mykolenko as their Rico Lewis cover, and now Mykolenko might not play. So it shouldn't probably massively affect people's plans, but it was enough to mention, like I said, in the video. So for Man City, it's pretty much as expected. Pep Guardiola confirmed that Kevin De Bruyne is going to miss game week 7. He said, for tomorrow, he's not ready. How can he go with Belgium when he didn't play one game for Man City since the injury? I never understood that. But anyway, he cannot play with us. He cannot play with Belgium. So De Bruyne are going to miss game week 7. Pep hasn't given us a timeline for when he might be back, but presumably it's not going to be super long term. He could be back by game weeks 8 or 9. That probably does play a part in Foden's minutes going forward. I think now he's starting to build up a bit of fitness. He started midweek and came off early. I'm pretty sure he's going to start in game week 7. I can never sit here and guarantee it with a Man City player, but I think he will. And if he performs well and De Bruyne is not back for 8, then there's no reason why he can't start in 8, possibly 9 as well. So if you're looking for a differential and you've got the money to get Foden, I don't hate it whatsoever. And he is going to be a massive differential versus what most people have in their squad. And most people probably aren't going to buy him either. Because I think for a lot of people, it would take 2 transfers. So De Bruyne out, but not a long-term one or anything like that. Ake also out. Then obviously Rodri and Oscar Bob are long-term. So minutes for Vardy are also looking pretty damn good at the moment. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So Spurs are about to go on a good fixture run. Who are the best 3 players to own? Now, I think with the news we had earlier about Son, we've got to discount him as an option. So I think it then comes down to probably Porro as the best defender if you've got the money to go up to him. Obviously, you can go for Udogie, who's a bit cheaper, Van der Ven, who's cheaper again. But if we're talking who is the best defender to own from Spurs, it's still Porro. I know there's a few things going around that with Maddison and Kulusevski in the team, Porro's not going to have to get as forward quite so much. But his underlying numbers are still pretty good. He is the most attacking defender in that Spurs team still. So he's definitely there. Solanke as well. I think he's a really good option for 7.6 million. We don't know who's on penalties for Spurs, and lots of Spurs fans will tell you it doesn't matter because they don't get them anyway. But it would be nice to know. It's possible it's Solanke, but I suspect it's probably Son. But I think even without penalties, you know, Solanke scored a bunch of goals last year. It wasn't all penalties. He can do it in that Spurs team. He's going to get plenty of chances. So I think he would be part of the best three. And then it's about which midfielder to go for. And I spoke about this on the game week preview, I believe it was, about between Johnson and Maddison. I think there's every chance that Maddison scores more points, but I think the 1.1 million saving would probably push me more towards Brennan Johnson. He's in really good form at the moment, 5 goals in the last 5 games. He almost scored a second last night as well, where he hit the bar. It was a really nice shot. He's not often going to get past like 75 minutes for you, but I think for 6.4 million around that price, he's probably one of the best options. Kulusevski is fine. But I just think his numbers, even in this new role he's playing, are not quite as good as the others. So I would probably ignore him. That 0.2 million saving for Kulusevski over Brennan Johnson just wouldn't be enough for me. So if I was buying 3 this week, I'd go Porro, Johnson, and Solanke. But definitely a shout out to James Maddison. If you want to go for him, he's a brilliant option. His numbers this year are great. The returns will come. And obviously Son from next week maybe if he's fit. I probably wouldn't go for... Where is he? Romero at 5.1. Like, he does have goal threat. He's already scored this year. He got 5 goals last year as well. I think I'd rather just pay 0.4 million more for Pedro Porro or just go down to 4.5 for Mickey van der Ven. So it depends how much you want to spend. But if we're talking the best options, I'd probably go Porro, Johnson, and Solanke this week. So should people be selling Salah for Palmer or Saka? Now, for me, I think in isolation this week, they're all pretty good options. I spoke about captaincy the other day, and I had Saka ahead of both Palmer and Salah. So I guess if I was saying who I think is the best pick of these this week, it probably would be Saka. I find Palmer and Salah a little bit more difficult to split, but you could say Palmer's better because of the home fixture. But I think to use a transfer on it, for me, would probably only be worthwhile if you're going to use that money for another upgrade somewhere else. So if you're doing Salah to Saka, and then that extra 2 million or so is going to be used to buy a great forward or another defender that's going to make your overall squad better, then I think it's probably worth it. But if you're just doing Salah to Palmer or Saka and not really making use of the money right now, I'd maybe consider just holding on to him and saving the transfer instead, and then maybe doing something a little bit different next week. Like, it's all well and good saying that, you know, Palmer could be better than Salah in game week 7, but when you add in game week 8 as well, Palmer's away to Liverpool and Salah's at home to Chelsea. That week, I'd rather have Salah. I think you can make an argument that Saka is just definitely the best over the next 2, Southampton at home and Bournemouth away. So I've got no... I think it's one of those moves where I've got no issue if you want to do it, right? I wouldn't argue against you if you wanted to do Salah to Saka. But I guess what's the long-term plan for getting Salah back, if you want him back? And is that money going to come in handy for you? Because although Chelsea at home and Arsenal away for Salah don't look great in 8 and 9. I've got to remember which game weeks there are. Like in 10, you've then got Brighton at home, Villa at home, Southampton away. I'd be pretty happy owning Salah for those weeks. So I mentioned this again, talking about other videos. There's some big decisions to be made soon about exactly which premiums you want, and I'm including Saka, Son, and Palmer in that conversation, and how many transfers you're going to spend moving them back and forth. I think it's fine to sell Salah if you want to, but a lot of people are going to want him back from 10. From 12, Palmer looks great. Saka looks great. Saka is obviously good for the next couple of weeks as well. Should they be selling it? It depends on so many things. I can't really give a broad answer. But if it's not being used, if you're not going to use the money this week for something like another big move, I'd consider just holding Salah and rolling the transfer. He's still pretty good, right? It's Crystal Palace away. It's not a terrible fixture. So is it time we started to double down on the Man City defence as opposed to Arsenal defence? The fixtures look better for Man City long term, and I think I'd rather have Ederson with Vardiol over Raya and Gabriel long term if wildcarding. Now, if you're wildcarding in game week 7, there is every reason to look at double Man City defence because of the next 4 fixtures. Fulham at home in 7, Wolves away in 8, Southampton at home in 9, Bournemouth away in 10. They all look pretty good. The next 3 after that, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Liverpool away, a little bit trickier. But then again, there's a fixture turn from 14 onwards where they get pretty decent again for Man City. So I think there is good reason to want to back their defence. Some people, myself included, have had very bad experiences with Ederson. But if I'm looking at it objectively, I think he's a pretty good option over the next few weeks. I would question, though, whether the long-term thing is definitely true in terms of who has the better fixtures. Because as I've just said, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Liverpool away, that little 3-game week run is not that great. And if you look at Arsenal, okay, they have a similar run between 9 and 11, which is Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away. But after that, the fixtures get good again. Like, if we ignore game weeks 9 to 11, this is the fixture run for Arsenal. Southampton at home, Bournemouth away, Nottingham Forest at home, West Ham away, Man United at home, Fulham away, Everton at home, Palace away, Ipswich at home, Brentford away. There's not really a huge amount of terrible fixtures in there. I would also put the Arsenal defence slightly above City. For whatever reason, right, City do not concede many chances themselves. They always find a way to concede 1 goal, though. Also, Gabriel is probably a little bit more nailed than Vardiol. I think Vardiol's minutes are probably very good for what it's worth. But if I had to bet on who's going to start the most games in the next 10 to 15 game weeks, my money would be on Gabriel. And then Raya and Ederson, maybe there's not a huge amount to split them. They can both make saves. So, personally, next 4 weeks, fine, Man City. Next 10 to 15, I'd still rather have double Arsenal defence, I think. So a few different people asked me this one. Do you think Luis Díaz will start in game week 7? Now, if I had to give an answer, which I guess I do because it's my video, I'd lean more towards him starting than being benched, purely because he's in Liverpool's best 11 at the moment, right? It's clear that he's first choice left winger. So it's more likely that he starts than doesn't. Would I put a huge amount of money on that? Probably not, because there are doubts there. But that is probably what I would say. And it's not like he's playing 90 minutes every single game. He got 72 minutes against Wolves after 71 against Bournemouth. Yes, he played in the Champions League midweek, but he also went off fairly early again. He's not playing 90 minutes every week, right? He can definitely play in game week 7 as well. And because he's first choice, there's a good chance of that happening. But the honest answer is I don't know for sure because Gakpo is also an option for slot. The good news is for any Diaz owners, it's the early kickoff. So if you're able to be around at the deadline or close to it, we will likely get some Liverpool news. Anyone that usually gives Liverpool information will probably know that Diaz and Gakpo is a bit of a talking point and they'll want to put that information out. It's not a guarantee that we will get it. It's also not a guarantee we will get it from a good source, but there'll be probably stuff out there on Saturday morning and you'll know whether he's going to start or not. Some people will probably have follow-up questions then that if he gets benched, should I sell him? I guess that depends what your long-term plans were with him, right? When you bought him, you knew there was doubts around whether he would start every game because of Gakpo. You know, it's Chelsea at home in 8, Arsenal away in 9. It's not great, but after that, the fixtures get good again. So if he was a long-term hold, I'm not sure the benching should really change your mind too much because it was always possible that could happen. And if you've got someone great on the bench like Rodgers, you can just play him instead if we get information. If we don't get any news ahead of the deadline, I think you've just got to play him because if he does start, he's a great option this week. So one of the best weeks to wildcard going forward, I was looking at both Game Week 8 and Game Week 12, which are after international break. So both of those game weeks will be quite popular. Some of it will come down to which players you don't own and how quickly you might want to bring them in. So for example, Game Week 6 was a really popular wildcard week, but some people that didn't have Haaland already decided to double down and not bring him in for the Newcastle game, which obviously worked out really well. But instead, they're wildcarding in Game Week 7 because they really want Haaland. He's got Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home. So a lot of it will come down to, like I said, which players you've got and which ones you want and how quickly you want to bring them in. The only thing I will say about Game Week 8 is the fixture swings primarily are for Man United, and I'm going to assume a lot of people watching this video do not want any Man United players, let alone 1, 2 or 3, or Spurs. But again, a lot of people already have one Spurs player. Is a wild card to get in a couple more enough? Probably not. Like if you're looking at the other big hitters, like if you're wildcarding Haaland in Game Week 8, well, you've missed Fulham at home. If you're wildcarding in Game Week 8 to get Palmer, well, he's got Liverpool away. Again, if you're wildcarding in Game Week 8 to get Salah, but he's got Chelsea at home, Arsenal away. And for Arsenal, like Saka, you've just missed Leicester at home and Southampton at home. So I think I'm trying not to say it's team dependent, right? But Game Week 8 could be a week that's really good for some people. But I think the fixture swings are for teams that most people just are not that bothered about having like double or triple ups from. Like triple up on Spurs is fine. Is it worth a wildcard? Maybe not. So I think Game Week 8 is okay. But I think for most people, it probably makes a little bit more sense to push it till Game Week 12. Because from Game Week 12 onwards, that's where, sorry, I just scrolled up the page a little bit. That's where Arsenal's fixtures get really good again. So you skip the Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away fixtures between 9 and 11. So you don't necessarily have to triple up on Arsenal, but if you've gotten rid of some of them, you might want to bring them back. It's also a really good fixture swing for Chelsea as well. So obviously the talk of the town at the moment is Palmer, but you might want to get in a defender, maybe Nicholas Jackson, whatever it might be. And from 12, they've got Leicester away, Villa at home, Southampton away. Spurs away in 15, a bit trickier, but then it's Brentford at home, Everton away, Fulham at home, Ipswich away. You're just putting Chelsea players in then and just leaving them. So it will depend on your team. Again, that's twice I've said it now. I'm not going to say it again in this section. But I think for most people, it probably makes more sense to go in 12 than it does 8, depending on how your team looks. So for my team, things are pretty straightforward this week, coming off the back of a wild card. I'm not being forced to transfer any players out. There's no one in my squad that's flagged or anything like that. The only doubt really is Rico Lewis, and this is a headache we're going to have every single week owning him. Is he going to start or not? Now, my money is on Lewis being benched because he played the full game in midweek. Walker didn't start. Vardiol came off early. It's all pointing towards Lewis being on the bench against Fulham. But because it's not a guarantee, I feel like I've got to start him. There is part of me that wants to play Pinnock instead to get that guaranteed start against Wolves at home. But Brentford defence is not necessarily one I'd be massively confident in. So I think I've got to go for the higher upside play and just hope that if Lewis is on the bench, that Pep doesn't bring him on. Although I'm not sure there's a high chance of that happening. I think if he is benched, he probably will come on. So I'm a little bit annoyed at myself that I've put myself in this position. But also, if Lewis starts and does really well against Fulham, I'll be happy I've got him. So I don't want to react too much right now. Alongside him, it's Gabriel and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Raya in goal for the double up for Arsenal defence. Hopefully does a bit better than it did against Leicester. In Burmo, Saka, Semenyo and Bruno Fernandes make up my midfield. Bruno Fernandes, he got sent off again last night. Now, I know the first one technically doesn't count because it was overruled, right, and the suspension was gotten rid of, essentially saying that shouldn't have been a red card. But he got sent off twice. Hasn't been sent off for like 240 odd games for Man United, now twice in a row. Like, the script writers can't keep putting me through this. It's an absolute nightmare. I'll come back onto him in a minute. Up front, Haaland, captain, that's going to stick. Solanke and Calvert-Lewin with Rodgers on the bench. Now, anyone that watched that Man United game last night knows that they're terrible defensively. You don't even have to watch the game last night. We've known that for a long time now. And most people are going to want me to play Rodgers. And I got to be honest with you, I'm almost at that point where I feel like I've got to put him in this team somewhere. I think he just is a really good option in Game Week 7 against Man United at home. Just looks great. I'm struggling with who to take out, though. It's not going to be Haaland or Saka, obviously. It's not going to be Mbeumo or Solanke. Semenyo, I put in because of Southampton at home, Leicester away. Or at least that was a big reason for putting him in the squad on wildcard. So I wouldn't really want to bench him against Leicester. So then it's Fernandes, Calvert-Lewin or Rodgers. Now, most people watching this will say just drop one of them and put Rodgers in. I get that. But I feel like a lot of the times FPL managers are just very fickle. Like in game weeks 3 or 4, or 3 and 4, all the questions were, why are we keeping Rodgers? Should we sell him? Right? He hasn't got any returns. Fast forward a couple of game weeks, he's got 2 assists and 1 goal in 2 weeks, and now he's unbenchable. So he's gone from, should we sell him? And in some cases, people were adamant that he had to be sold, to now, you can't bench him under any circumstance, especially when you've got Fernandes and Calvert-Lewin in your 11. I'm probably somewhere more in the middle. I've said all along that I think Rodgers is a great option while he's playing number 10 for Villa. I just think Calvert-Lewin at home to Newcastle, not a bad fixture. He's also on penalties. And then if I've got Bruno Fernandes, I've got to play him. I have to play him. Like anyone watching this, if this was your team, well, first of all, you probably wouldn't have Bruno and you'd probably be selling him this week. But if you weren't allowed to make any transfers, I'm not convinced that most people watching this video would actually bench him, a 90-minute man on penalties. I just don't think you would. So I've got to start him. And I think he will play. I guess when you're club captain, you get sent off twice in a row, you're potentially up there for being made an example of. But that would be such a ballsy call from Ten Hag to drop your captain. If that goes wrong, you're done. He's already probably done. That would absolutely kind of put the final nail in the coffin. So I think he'll start. I think Man United will probably lose, but that doesn't mean Fernandes can't get points. All it takes is a dodgy penalty, 3 bonus points, and all of a sudden it doesn't look like a terrible decision to keep him. So for now, he stays. Game week 8 onwards, let's see. That's when the good fixtures start for Man United. I'm not confident in getting any points from him, but I don't think there's a need to rush into a decision this week when he is available. And I've only got 1 free transfer. Like, I could move to Brennan Johnson. I don't hate that. But I also think if I'm going to do Bruno Fernandes to Palmer or Son by selling Trent maybe next week, what's the point in going to Johnson and only having 1 transfer in game week 8? I'm basically undecided on what I want to do moving forward. And because of that, I'd rather just get the extra transfer. So for now, Fernandes is probably going to stay. Wildcard 6 was really the only time I've had to get rid of him with a free transfer. Because in game week 5, I sold Isak instead, who was a doubt, who also blanked. So I kept him on 6. I had him instead of Diaz. I've not been massively punished by that. Maybe I will be this week. But I think the team actually looks okay. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about him anymore. That is almost certainly going to be my 11. I'm probably going to bench Rodgers, probably regret it. That's fine. I'm okay with it. If it goes wrong, so be it. And Rico Lewis, please start. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream.